Thank you for watching Conscious Consumer Network. The live stream broadcast is free to view. You can pause and rewind live broadcasts to catch up, or view shows at a later date by accessing our free archives of all shows. Check out our broadcast guide to see what's on. You can show your support by donating to our network support fund. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, or subscribe to the monthly newsletter for updates. We thank you for supporting free and independent media.
This is For the Love of Learning, Voices of the Alternative Education Movement. Be inspired by the voices of visionaries, changemakers, and ordinary, extraordinary people who do what they do, all for the love of learning.
This is For the Love of Learning, Voices of the Alternative Education Movement. I'm Lainie Liberti, and this is episode number 69. In this episode, we're going to explore the continuum concept. For those of you that haven't heard of the continuum concept, it is an idea coined by Jean Liedloff in her 1975 book called The Continuum Concept. The book is based on the premise that human beings are born with an innate sense of expectations, which Liedloff calls the continuum. She believes that our evolution has destined us as a species, to achieve optimal physical, mental, and emotional development and adaptability naturally. Liedloff spent 2.5 years deep in the South American jungle with a group of indigenous people. The experience demolished her Western preconceptions of how we should live and led her to a radically different view of what human nature really is. She offers a new understanding of how we have lost much of our natural way of being and shows us practical ways to regain it for our children and for ourselves. The book is not written as a child-rearing manual per se. However, the continuum concept has earned a reputation as an excellent resource for parents who intuitively feel that the parenting techniques of the modern era are inherently misguided. It has also been helpful to many adults, parents, and non-parents alike who hope to recover the natural state of happiness lost as a result of the modern child-rearing practices of their well-meaning parents. We've got a lot to talk about tonight, so let's get started. But first, I'm going to introduce each of our panelists, and I want to remind our audience that you can find out more about each of our panelists on the show notes page located at consciousconsumernetwork.tv, and look for the show notes page for episode number 69. There you will find more information about each of our panelists, links to their projects and websites. So first, I'd like to introduce you to Scott. And Scott has been on the show before, and we're honored to have him back. Scott is a parenting coach and author of The Daily Groove, How to Enjoy Parenting Unconditionally. Since 2006, more than 20,000 families have been served by his practical parenting wisdom through the free Daily Groove mailing list online at dailygroove.com. Scott believes that children are innately good and that a natural partnership style of parenting is the best way to foster their goodness. He teaches parents how to avoid coercive parenting methods by focusing on 4 positive pathways to power: partnership, authenticity, trust, and heart, in an approach he calls path parenting. And as an advocate of homeschooling and self-directed learning, Scott is on the board of directors of the newly formed Alliance for Self-Directed Education. He lives in Portland, Oregon with his partner Beth and their two teenage children. So welcome to tonight's discussion, Scott.
Thank you, Lainie. This is a great introduction. I'd like to meet that guy. He sounds awesome. It's good to be back on the show, and excited to talk about the Continuum concept, which is how it all began for me.
Well, let me tell you, Scott, that guy is awesome. So glad you're back. So, I want to introduce you to our second panelist tonight, Eliane. She is the creator of Clean Parenting Program, a transformational journey that connects parents to their instincts and their children's innate goodness and effectively supports them in living in their families with ease and harmony. She is the author of the upcoming book, Clean Parenting, the Peaceful Parent's Essential Handbook. She is also working on a book titled Applying the Continuum Concept Parenting Philosophy to Modern Day Living. After reading dozens of parenting books, Eliane read TCC, we'll just call it TCC for short, in 1994 when her eldest daughter was just 2 years old. She was so inspired by the Continuum concept, Eliane set out to try and apply this approach to parenting into her American suburban life. And she's thrilled with the results, having now 3 thriving, unencumbered adult daughters who all have healthy and a strong sense of self. Eliane founded Parenting for Wholeness in 2013 for 2 main purposes. The first is to support parents in having ease and harmony in their families while ensuring that their children grow up whole. And the second purpose is to help parents heal from their childhood baggage so they can parent in alignment with their values and also live from a place of wholeness, peace, and happiness. So welcome to tonight's panel, Eliane, and so happy you're with us.
Well, thank you so much, Lainie. I'm so happy to be here. And yeah, talking about the Continuum concept and peaceful parenting, I think we could go all night. So I'm really looking forward to seeing how all of this unfolds tonight, and very excited to be here with both you and Scott.
We're so excited to have you. And with that, let's just jump right in. Eliane, why don't you share with us a little bit about your own personal journey or story of transformation and inspiration as a result of reading the book, The Continuum Concept?
What to say? Well, I think for me, it would start with that, like, even as a child, I had a sense that things were off and I could never find answers, you know, and like I would ask questions, but my feelings were just denied. And so I just felt really pretty lost, actually, until I got pregnant and I discovered the world of nonfiction books. And then I was like, wow, there's answers out there. Like, I'm not just stuck in this misery that I had felt, you know, inside. And so I just started reading a lot, and I joined La Leche League, and I become librarian of my La Leche League group, so I could have all the books at my house all the time, and I read all the books. And I kept hearing of this book, The Continuum Concept, and I finally read it when my oldest was 2. And it rocked my world, you know. It just, every bit of it just resonated. It's like I would read parenting books before and things would resonate, but they just seemed like different ideas, but that didn't all fit together. And when I read the Continuum Concept, it was like, there was something in me knew that it was true. And then I just had to figure out how to apply it. So I read it and reread it and reread it. It didn't occur to me to schedule sessions with Jean. Like, I never met her, which is really funny. And yet when I talk with people who have worked with her, it's amazing how similar our experiences. So I think I did very much apply it in the way that she guided people to do it. But that's how it was for me. I just kept rereading it. And I, by that point I was a LLHLA leader. So I got all my friends and all the leaders to read the book. And then we'd all get together and try to figure out like, how do we work this? So we'd have our combined, I don't know how many children, 10, 15 children. And we just talked it out until at some point it just kind of clicked for me. And then I never read another parenting book after that. Like I really felt like once that gelled, I mean, it's weird to say, but I kind of felt like I was done with, like I wasn't parenting anymore. I was just living with my children. And then the rest, I still had, a whole bunch of stuff to figure out in my life that I'm still so working on. But the parenting piece, it's like once I really got connected to my instincts and stepped into my role as being their leader and was not afraid to set limits and was just authentic and really trained myself to have all my interactions with them coming from the premise that they're innately good, so that if there's some behavior that I don't like, there's a cost to it, and addressing the cause. And yeah, I don't know, it just, and like, it's funny because I have, somehow in the past few years I've become a parenting coach, which was never really my intention, but that's a whole other story. But people say, how do you handle the situation? And every time I'm like, I don't know. Like, I don't know how to handle the situation, because there's no right way. It's about just being connected to yourself and being present to the situation and not having all the conditioning. It's almost like, I feel like a lot of the work that I do with parents, it's more about unlearning and like very much like unschooling, like undoing the conditioning and undoing the beliefs and undoing the assumptions that we've so adopted through, even if we have a lot of peaceful parent friends, it's so embedded in our society, the belief that we're wrong and that we need to be manipulated into doing the right thing or incentivized. And so just undoing that, and then you just know in the moment what to do. There's never a right or wrong. Well, I suppose there's wrongs, but I would say there are wrongs. But
yeah, no,
anyway, that's a little bit. I could probably just talk for a whole 2 hours. But.
Well, I'm gonna, yes, and you touched on every single point that I'm sure we're gonna expand on in the show, throughout the show. But what I love about your intro and Scott's intro and speaking to both of you about this book is that's the end all book. That was the one that really inspired both of you. And it's really interesting because it is so contrary, well, not contrary, it's different. It's a different approach than those that are coming at education from the educational perspective. You're coming at it from the human perspective. And we're going to talk about all that stuff. So, but actually, let's just jump on over to Scott next. Scott, I want to know, because we're going to talk about what the continuum concept is and how it's applied in both of your lives and in the work that you do. But I want to know your personal story, your journey that started from the book, the continuum concept itself, and how that transformed or inspired your life.
Great. I love how Eliane brought it all the way back to when she was a child, because I have a similar experience of, and I think probably a lot of people listening and who like that book in particular have a similar experience and why it resonates with them, because it resonates with something that we felt from the very beginning, the sense of wrongness that Jean describes so eloquently in the book, that there's something wrong with the way we live and the way we relate, and that there's some sense of rightness that we can learn in nature and in people who live in harmony with nature, which is, of course, how she learned it. For me, I remember some of my earliest memories were feeling the contrast between my friends' parents who were authoritarian and my own parents who were more laissez-faire, kind of just I was fortunate that they were not punitive in their parenting style. And so I really got to experience that contrast and feel the wrongness of it from a very early age. And I remember throughout childhood, whenever I experienced my friends being punished and being afraid of their parents, and I would always think to myself, I'm going to do things differently. I'm going to find a better way. And I never really found it until I read the Continuum concept. I didn't fully get it. But in fact, when my wife announced to me that she was going to have a baby, and there was that sort of moment where it wasn't exactly planned. It was sort of, and so like there's that moment of like, oh my God, I don't think I'm ready. And all we knew was that we wanted to try to do things naturally. That's really all we knew. It's like that we had more faith in nature than in sort of like the medical system and that sort of expert advice. So we were inclined to make choices like home birth and co-sleeping and breastfeeding. And this was back in 1997, before attachment parenting was really much of a thing, and before the internet was brand new at the time. So so I remember thinking, okay, I think we got this figured out. But around the time my baby, our first baby, was 2 months old, we noticed that she would cry whenever we set her down. And we thought, well, something's wrong with this baby. You're supposed to be able to set them down. And she was only not crying if we were holding her. So we went to our doctor, and we were fortunate enough to have a woman doctor who was very progressive. And she said, there's nothing wrong with your baby. The only thing that's wrong is that you haven't read the Continuum concept yet. And so we got the book that day, read it within a day, and it was just like Eliane said, it just blew our minds away. And there was this immense feeling of relief, like now I have a roadmap. Now I have a sense of how to figure things out. I understand human nature in a different way, so I can relate to these problems that come up in a different way. And so things got better very rapidly, but there were still problems. And we saw in the back of the book, there was a little paragraph that said, send a self-addressed stamped envelope to this address in California. And it was the beginning of the internet age, and no one was sending self-addressed stamped envelopes anymore. So, but we sent it anyway, and we waited and we waited and we waited, and we were thinking, we need answers now. We need to talk to other parents who are doing this. And that's what we had sent away for, this newsletter. And finally, I couldn't wait any longer, and I found Jean Liedloff's phone number, and I called her, and I said, did you get our application for the newsletter? Did you get our self-addressed stamped envelope? And I don't remember what she said about that, but the conversation led to I volunteered to create a website. And I said, if we put everything online, then people can share support instantly. And so within a few months, we had a website, and we had this email-based discussion group, which is still in existence today. I believe Eliane is still active on that. Is that right? Yeah. So, and that was where it all began, the sense of community, a global community of readers of the Continuum concept, people for whom the book had resonated, and for whom they just wanted support in putting those principles into practice and how to make sense of it in the modern world. So because of my position as the sort of a webmaster and the moderator, initially I was the moderator of that online community, and plus I had a background in coaching in the music field. So I kind of became an informal parenting coach in that community. And people sort of got used to asking me for advice. And so at one point, somebody called me or emailed me offline and said, I really would like to work privately with you because I've done the thing that I said I would never do. I struck my child, and I'm too ashamed to talk about it in a public forum. And I said, well, people have been telling me I should do life coaching or parent coaching anyway, so let's try it. And that was how I got started. But very similar to Eliane, I think sometimes it's just a calling and it falls in your lap, and you realize this is something that I can do. So I did finally meet Jean Liedloff in 2001, shortly after my second baby was born. And we spent the night on her houseboat and had dinner with her, and got to introduce to some of her quirks. She's sort of she was a bit of an eccentric person, but a very loving and generous person. And so that was the one time I met her in person, and the rest of my contact with her was always on the telephone.
So for those that haven't read the book, I'm going to ask each of you to kind of give us a summary of what the book is about for somebody who's never even heard of it, and maybe go over some of the main concepts. I'm sure you've been asked this plenty of times. Scott, why don't you start?
Sure. So, well, the first thing I want to mention is that something I actually learned recently, because a friend of ours, Geraldine Gendro, is writing a biography of Jean. And what I didn't realize was that 2.5 years that she spent with the indigenous people in the Amazon rainforest was actually spread out over 20 years. So it really took her a long time to figure out what it was that she was sensing. And she describes in the first chapter of how these experiences of seeing the different kind of attitudes and perspectives and ways of responding to each other, ways of relating with each other, that she was witnessing in these indigenous people. She was trying to make sense of it, and eventually put it all together, that they were living the way that people had evolved to live, in what she calls the innately social way, that we are a social animal, and that we've survived and been a successful species because of our great capacity for creating social harmony, for working with each other rather than against each other, which is what we see so much in modern society, and in particular the adversariality between parents and children is something that was not witnessed ever when she was with these people in the jungle, living the way our ancestors had lived for thousands and even millions of years. So I think she finally put it together that way of living and those kinds of relationships and those kinds of experiences is what we are evolved for. And that when children come into a world and they're met, instead of with partnership, they're met with adversariality from adults, from doctors, from teachers. They're opposed at it seemingly at every turn, and that really prevents children from developing the way nature intended. When children grow up in an environment where there's more of a sense of partnership, more of an egalitarian ethos in the home or in the family and community environment, then they develop in a very different way, and they're able to thrive in ways that are possible because they're not constantly defending against that adversariality. And when your defenses are down, you get to open up and follow your curiosity and be creative and all these things that are possible because you're not expending your energy defending against coercion. More? You want more? Okay. So the continuum concept is, I like to think of the continuum as so Jean loved to play with words. She was making puns constantly. And I think when she came up with the title of the continuum concept, she really meant it in 2 or 3 different ways. So one was the continuum being this sort of long process of evolution. So in other words, if you go all the way back to the beginning of the human species over time, there's this sort of continuous repetition of experiences from generation to generation. And the idea was that we had adapted to those kinds of experiences. So, because of that long continuum, we're born expecting to have similar experiences that go back, like in particular, the experiences of infants. They expect to be held upon as soon as they're born. They expect to be in the arms of their mother. They expect to be able to search for the breast and to find it. And they don't expect to be put in a plastic box somewhere. I think you're going to play a video later on in this interview, and Jean says it more eloquently than I can. But there's so many things that early experiences of the type of birth and the type of nurturing or the lack of nurturing, sometimes the isolation, that are so far removed from that continuum that it creates a kind of a maladapted human being. And so that's one meaning of the continuum. Another is this idea of being continuously connected, this idea of that children the human species is adapted to sort of develop, the first 9 months in utero and the second 9 months ex utero. So this, what she calls the in arms period, is that period where the child is developing in very close contact with caregivers and never really just sort of left the way we so often do in modern society, left either in a crib somewhere in an empty room, or left in a plastic bucket. So often we call them baby buckets because it's just, we always feel sad when we see these babies just sitting in buckets all day, and for the convenience of moving them in and out of cars. But
which is so convenient, right? It's like I look at these moms trying to carry these heavy buckets instead of having this tiny little baby in a sling on their body, and I'm like, you are not making your life easier, honey. Like.
Right, and that's one of the example of how the other meaning of the continuum is sort of interrupted, because instead of the experience of being next to your caregivers, and being a part of the movement of humanity, you're in this lifeless plastic thing, and you can't feel the subtleties of movement. You can't feel the heartbeat of your caregiver. You can't sense their moods as, there's so many subtle things that are being lost because we, for convenience or for safety, we're putting children away from where they were meant to be, in the arms of their mothers and other caregivers.
And I know, Lainie, you're asking to describe the continuum concept, but I was thinking today, it's kind of odd to be on this panel because I haven't read the book in over 20 years, or in about 20 years. So I don't, I know what I've integrated into my life, but in terms of, I don't even consider myself a continuum concept expert, or, to me, it was more like what I integrated in my life. And really, it wasn't until I met Alexandra Burt, who also, helps parents integrate a continuum concept and work closely with Jean Liedloff, that I realized, oh, I've done everything exactly the same. So I guess I have, properly applied the continuum concept, but it's hard for me to really speak to what it was, because it's something that I worked on integrating when I was still like barely a child myself, and that just really became a part of me. So I feel like Scott has pretty much covered, everything that I would think of. I guess one of the things for me that I experienced that was, well, maybe there are two things that he has touched on that for me were really powerful ones. And one is to really trust in children's instincts. So I feel like I'm much better at helping people who have older children than babies, because anyway, whatever, it's just how it is. But just the sense of trust, that if you really trust children to be able to, like even babies are pretty aware of limits if you really observe them. And actually, I have a really funny story about that really brought it home for me. So like I said, I didn't practice the continuum concept with my oldest, Cassandra. In fact, she was born in a hospital and she was in a crib for a few months until I came across Dr. Sears and brought her in bed. And but then with Audrey, when I had my second, then, she was born at home and went from the belly to the sling and was never put down. And I was still rereading the book. And this one time I was sitting on a couch that was like a long couch, and I was sitting sideways, and Audrey was just learning to sit. So she's sitting on the edge of the couch with her back to the edge of the couch. Here, I have to show you guys. So she's sitting there with her back to the edge of the couch, but her back is completely straight, and she's playing with her toy, and there's no indication that she's in any way aware of her surroundings. And I'm there, and I want to read my book, and I want to just focus on my book and not be worried about my, 6-month-old baby there. So I thought, well, let me just extend my leg and put my foot behind her back. So in case, she topples, I can stop her. And one of the points that Jean makes in the book is that once you take over children's safety, once you take over taking care of their safety, they stop taking care of it themselves. So in that moment, the second that my foot went behind Audrey's back, she just completely slouched. It was like, even though she didn't look at my foot, she was still concentrated on her little toy. I saw that as soon as I interfered, she stopped taking over. She stopped, taking care of her own safety. And I was like, damn, excuse me. Like it works. Like it was such a big illustration to me. And like with my two youngest ones, I didn't have gates to the basement stairs, and those two never fell down, but Cassandra did once when we forgot to shut the pocket door. So that is one thing. And I mean, it's a subtle thing when they're babies, but just starting the sense of trust of not telling them what to do, not telling them to be careful, it's more than that, though. It's just trusting that they're already whole being who are wired for survival, and that if you just honor them, they'll really develop to be, able to take care of themselves and pretty self-sufficient. Like my kids were cooking by the time they were 5 or 6, and I really felt like I was done parenting by the time they were 12, because I didn't really make decisions for them. And I just talked with them, and I really saw them as really capable beings from a really young age. And that's just, people would tell me, oh my God, your girls are so mature, and oh wow, you're so lucky. And I was like, no, all children are. I mean, okay, maybe mine are but no, but really it is, all children can be that way. And my girls left for college, and I had zero concerns. And one went, I'm in Illinois, one went to Florida, and the other one went to Manhattan, And even the one, I'm like, she's in NYC, and I'm not concerned. I'm not concerned for her safety. Like, they're connected. They know if something's off. They don't end up in troubled situations. Like, they are just very tapped in, and they didn't get into all the relationships that I got in. And they didn't do all the stuff that I did as a teenager because they didn't have a need to rebel. But yeah, that sense of trust, to me, that was a really big piece.
I can concur with that now that I have teenagers as well, and I always tell parents, whatever you invest, it's hard to do it in the early years, but you have to think of it as an investment, and the payoff comes when they're teenagers. And like Eliane said, that it's like it doesn't even feel like parenting anymore. And your friends who had a more adversarial style, more controlling style of parenting when the kids were younger, then their kids in teenage years don't have the self-control or the maturity to really make good judgments necessarily. And so the more you trust early on, you establish that pattern of trust, you establish a pattern of partnership. They expect you to be on their side. To me, that's the whole point of what Jean calls non-adversarial parenting, is just that when their predominant experience throughout childhood is that mommy and daddy are on my side, then they don't have to hide from you as teenagers. They don't have to sneak around and do things. They can talk about things, and they can trust that you're not going to arbitrarily try to control them all the time, that you're generally not going to thwart them in any way unless it's absolutely necessary for their safety. But it's kind of funny, as my kids have become teenagers, I've found myself frustrated that I had all these tools to use that I didn't get to use because they just never presented any problems. But it is, yeah. And after a while, it just feels like, especially with my 19-year-old who's legally an adult now, and we still live together, and we share my car because I work at home. I never need my car. And now it's kind of like our car. It's like we're just adults who live together and have this wonderful lifelong history.
Yeah, I hear you. And to me, this is so fascinating because on so many levels, I've read about everything that you're talking about, but I read about them under different labels, and I never read the continuum concept. And as I started to research for this show, I'm realizing that we're talking about the same thing, but there are subtle differences. There are real subtle differences from the background that I have, which is, from attachment parenting. Yes, I read Sears too when I was pregnant, and, I went full force into attachment parenting, but it was like this thing that I did in order to create a relationship with my child. And then, it moved into unschooling and the partnership. And it was this other thing that I did. But what you're talking about is not doing a thing. You're talking about listening to the innate sort of, I guess it would be not just biological, but cultural, spiritual, holistic development of a human being that you don't even, the natural part of just existing, the consciousness does it, and you just have to honor that. I'm not sure I'm being clear.
Yeah, to me, it all goes down to being present. Just being fully present, clear all the crap, and what's here once you've cleared all of your crap and all of your beliefs and all your conditioning and all your ideas about what a child should be, and bring in a few realistic expectations that you might not have, that, people in tribal settings learn from observing their mothers and their sisters and their aunts and friends and all of that. But to me, that's my goal. Like when I work with people, it's like, I want to get you to just be fully present, know yourself, know your child, and be conscious of what the situation is. And in that place, what to do.
I agree. I get it. Can both of you talk about parenting from a place of being present and a place of not fear, a place of, the opposite would be trusting? Can you talk about that?
Well, I feel like the book itself is sort of one of my major sources of trust. In other words, when I talk about trust, I talk about it on 3 levels. And the first is trusting human nature. And you need to read books like The Continuum Concept to rethink what you thought was true about human nature before you can actually trust that children are innately social and they don't need to be punished and rewarded into compliance, that they do figure out how to be, how to get along with people and how to work with you if you work with them, and all that stuff is a revamping of the human nature that we grew up believing in. So trust, that to me is the first level of trust. The second level of trust is learning to trust your inner guidance, because there are so many outer influences and voices of society and voices of your parents and your friends and experts and just the at large whoever they are, whatever they say.
And all the voices in our heads too, because that's
Right.
what I find a lot too. Is, you know, people like mom saying, okay, so I wanted to do this, but then I thought this and I worried about this, and I remember she said this in a book, and I'm like, forget that, forget the book, burn the book. Like, what feels right? Like, when it feels right in your bones, that's the right thing. And so to me, that I see that a lot, the voices in somebody's head, that the initial instinct is right, but then they talk themselves out of it from all of that conditioning.
Right. And they have to learn how to differentiate between what is their true inner guidance and what is just an internalized external voice of their mother, of their parents or society or whatever. And when you can do that, you become more like these people that Jean met in the jungle, who have a cultural ethos of authenticity, where they're expected to to be able to guide themselves and not to be put under all kinds of pressure by, through threats of coercion or threats of punishment. People do things the way they do because it's the way they've always done them, because it's the way that keeps them happy, because it's the way that keeps them feeling connected, and because it just feels good to have a workable culture. And that's a very different motivation, to go by what feels right than to go by what others tell you is right. And I think that's the biggest difference between more of an intrinsic guidance and an extrinsic form of guidance. Which is why it's tricky in the position as a parent coach. I'm sure this is true for you as well, Eliane, which is that sometimes people come to you, they're so used to that external guidance that they just want you to tell them what to do. And sometimes, we can give them tips and that sort of thing, but what we really want to give them is access to their own inner guidance, so that they, we basically want to put ourselves out of business so that they can be really, they're coaching themselves in a way.
Yeah, and I did find it, for me, it was like, I've heard once the analogy of a wire walker. Is that how you say it? Somebody who walks a high wire, that like at first you're really, really, really wobbly, and then you get a little bit less and a little bit less. And to me, that's what it was like. It's like, at first, to find that place of rightness, it takes a lot of like trying things out and, messing up, quote unquote. But over time, you start, like, it becomes such a finely tuned, like, feeling system, is what it feels like to me, that you just feel what's right, and you can use that as your compass. And I mean, for me, at some point it just became automatic, and I didn't really think about it anymore.
And as you develop that kind of trust in your own inner guidance, to what I consider the third and most profound form of trust is trusting life itself, and getting to the place where you feel like life isn't out to get you, And I think a lot of children are born into an experience that gives them that belief, and on the day, literally the first day of life, they're being opposed being slapped on the butt, and then, prodded and isolated, and for a lot of unfortunate people, mutilated. But I don't want to go there right now. But there's a lot of really horrible, traumatic things that happen to children who just expect to come into the world and feel their mother's breath and heartbeat and arms, and that luxurious, I don't know, I can't think of the word, but it's like a blissful state, like being in the womb, but not in the womb, on the outside. And I think that original insult to the human continuum is then followed by, as they become toddlers, they're opposed, and they're punished and made to feel like there's something wrong with their natural impulses, and if they want to play, or if they want to be joyful and jump up and down and make noise, and people are telling them to shut up and be seen and not heard, and all other kinds of things that are opposing kids. And people just grow up with a sense that life is out to get me, like I'm screwed in some way. And I think for many people, that third level, that deepest level of trust, of trusting life itself, is sort of the healing of those early experiences.
Yeah.
You know
I was just gonna say, I can, like, to me, I'm still working on this. I still feel like life is out to get, like, I'm still working on that, because I had a pretty traumatic childhood. So for me, that was my guidance, is I was so committed to my girls never experiencing what I experienced, and having experienced it, that was my guidance too, because I could, and I'm also like very highly sensitive, so I could feel anything that would hurt me. So whenever I would feel that, I thought, no, there's got to be a different way, and the continuum concept is what told me that there was a different way, so that I wouldn't stop until I found that. So that was my drive always, was, if there's not a way for me to handle this where my child seems happy, or, it's okay if they get upset sometimes if you set a limit or whatever. That's not what I'm talking about. But the kind of unhappiness that to me speaks to like a damage to their sense of self. I guess that's a word that I use a lot. I would just keep looking for something, like there had to be a different way. There had to be a different way. And I wasn't going to stop looking until I found that. And it is like, as much as I struggle in life, my girls don't. And they all say, I don't know, like something will happen and they're like, I don't know, life just works out for me. I'm not worried about what's going to happen. Like, there's such a sense of trust. And it is. Their lives do work out. I mean, they're not perfect, but, they're not. Oh, I thought you were.
Finished.
I'm sorry, I'm not understanding your signal.
No, I'm so sorry. Whenever you're finished, we have a question from the audience for you, actually.
Okay.
I'm so sorry.
So one of the things to me that, I do tend to draw a lot of people who had painful childhoods is what draws them to this type of parenting, and what makes them resonate with my writing and my specific take on things. And one of the things, and I've talked about writing a book called How to Raise a Healthy Child When You're All Fucked Up, because I feel like that's what I did. I'm still so working on my own issues, but somehow I managed not to pass it on to them. And it's not perfect. And yes, there's only so much you can heal in one generation, but it's amazing what I've been able to do, considering how much, even now that they're grown, I still, personally struggle. So to me, that's the hope. And that's the tool, I would say. Not that I would ever call the continuum concept a tool, but that's what it gave me, was really this really clear blueprint of what it could look like and what to strive for. Oh, I think you're muted, Lainie.
Sorry about that. I'm so sorry to have interrupted you. I didn't mean to. There's so somebody's watching the show live, and there was a question for you, Eliane, and I wanted to make sure that when you finished, I got to you and got to ask you this question. So the question is, Eliane, can you please go a little bit further into what you mean about being a leader to your kids as it applies to the continuum concept? And the person who wrote the question says, I'm afraid of authoritarian parents abusing that title. And also, and there's also a question for Scott after you answer.
Okay, I'm hearing a weird sound. Is it just me, or do you guys hear it too?
I think that was Lainie's microphone had something on.
Okay. Well, I'm not hearing it now. So again, the leadership. Again, today I was trying to think about how does Jean describe it, Scott? Like, how does she title it? Because I've come to call it clear, benevolent leadership, but I'm not sure.
I don't think she ever came up with a good title for it. She called it not being child-centered, but that was sort of a negative definition of it.
Okay. I thought it was from the book that I got that term, being a leader, but so to me, so part of it, let's see if I can do it justice. I'm also a morning person, so I was a little concerned about doing something so late at night. My brain tends to shut down a little bit. But to me, one of the things that I got from the book is that children are not just like innately good, but they're also innately social. And one of the things that she describes, and correct me, Scott, if I'm wrong, but my memory might have, changed it a little bit, but is that they do have a drive to learn from their elders. Like, there's this expectation. So yes, they have their own instincts. Like, they can feel if there's a drop and they can stop themselves. But there are a lot of things that being social beings, that we learn from the people around us, and that they have the expectation to be shown those things, and that they very much do want to learn. And one of the analogies that, I don't even know if I came up with it or if I read it somewhere, but it's like, so imagine if you travel to a foreign country where you don't speak the language, and you have a guide who's there to help you, but they're really afraid of, telling you what to do. So they're just really tentative about giving you information. And sometimes they don't give it to you because they're afraid of how you might take it, or they're afraid that, you might be encroaching, they might be encroaching on you. And what would that feel like to be in that foreign setting? Versus if you were with a guide who was very kind and very respectful, but at the same time very confident, and knew you well and knew what you knew and knew the land or the country that they're in, and we're just there to provide you the information as you need it. Like, you walk into a certain social setting, it's expected here that you take off your shoes. Like, they're not pussyfooting around it. They're not saying, oh, I'm really sorry, honey, but do you think maybe you could please take off your shoes? Like, they just present you the information matter-of-factly, expecting that you do want the information and that you're going to act on it because you trust them and you want to be respectful of the people around you. And so to me, that's the attitude that we want to develop. So what to me makes it, what I call a clear, benevolent leader is that you are always respectful of your child, and you know your child, so you know what information they need and what information they don't need. So it's not like you repeat the same thing all the time. It's like the first time they encounter a situation, you let them know, oh, for this, do this. Or, when we go there, we do this thing. Or, oh, when you use this thing, this is how you use it. And that it's always presented as, yes, the child is innately good and has good intentions, and they're just lacking a piece of information, and you're offering the information. But there's also another piece of you know, like they're so brand new to the world. If you think of like a little toddler, a 1-year-old or a 2-year-old, and if they don't feel like there's somebody who's got things under control, like there's somebody that they can really trust and who's taking care of things, like they don't feel right inside. So they need to feel like there's somebody who's got this somewhere and who they can trust. And like my children did, I could take them anywhere, you know, and I had three in 5 years. So at some point I had, you know, like I remember traveling by myself by airplane with a baby and a 2-year-old and a 5-year-old, and it was not a problem. And they wouldn't run away. And at the same time, they were very free and very lively and very exploratory, but they knew to like turn to me before doing something new. And it was just a look, you know, they could just look at me and I would go yes or no. And that was enough. But a big part of it comes from them really, really feeling that you're on their team. So what Scott was describing as not being adversarial, like when they really, really feel it in their bones, like there's no doubt that they just know mom's on my side, or mom, dad, they welcome the information and they know you're not going to be trying to talk them out of stuff. And
so, and we have in our society a sort of confusion between what is a leader and what is not a leader. And a lot of people that we call leaders are really dictators. They're controllers. They're people that are on a power trip, and they're not there to serve you. They're there to control you. And I think the distinction, a true leader sees herself or himself as a servant. I'm here to help. I'm here to serve. I'm here to provide leadership as meeting a need. In other words, the child needs the leadership. They look to you for the leadership, and you give it to them because they clearly indicated that they need it. And they'll also clearly indicate when they don't need it. So there are times when just sort of out of habit, you offer some sort of leadership, and then like with a 3-year-old that's just learning a new competency, they don't want to be led. They want to figure out if they can do it on their own. They'll say, no, me do it, you know? And that was like, oh, okay. Now, am I going to react to that and say, hey, I'm the boss? Or am I just going to say, oh, I wasn't attuned enough to know that this child did not need leadership at that moment. So it was inappropriate for me to offer it. And I take a step back and let them lead themselves. And that's how people become leaders, by seeking leadership and being led, and then by being allowed to lead themselves.
Okay, well, Scott, that's a perfect segue into the question that was asked by one of the viewers. And this question is for you. And the question is, what do you say to parents when their children are taking power over their parents? And that's the quote. And that is a question from Coralie.
So when children are taking power over whom? Children are
over their parents.
Okay. So, well, this gets back to what I was mentioning before about child-centeredness, where typically I wouldn't say so much that the children are taking power over the parents so much as that there's a sort of a mixed up power dynamic that happens in a lot of situations with parents where well-meaning parents are trying to be of service to their children, and in doing so, they're constantly asking, what do you need? What do you need? What do you need? And this is what Jean called being child-centered. Like all of your attention is centering on what, how to serve the needs of the child to such an extreme that you're projecting this feeling to the child that you don't know what you're doing because you're constantly asking them for advice. And when that happens, you get this sort of reversal, and then because there's a lack of this true kind of leadership that Eliane was talking about, you end up with the baby just sort of filling the vacuum, or the child fills the vacuum and said, well, if you're not going to lead me, then I guess I'll have to lead you. And that's sort of what you're asking for anyway. So it's really this when a child is controlling the parent, it's usually because the parent has inadvertently given their power away to the child, and that happens a lot of times because parents want so much not to be abusers of power that they end up forsaking power altogether. And then that's not what the children need. The children need powerful parents who use their power in the form of partnership, not in the service of control. So when parents make that shift into owning their power and using it to serve the whole partnership, both the child and the parent and the whole family, then that changes the power dynamic back to something more natural, which Jean often called that just sort of not being child-centered. I wrote an article where I just gave it another name, just sort of like being, now I can't remember. I wrote it several years ago. Anyway, sometimes we jokingly say, let's just being centered. And when you're centered in yourself and you feel your own power, and then you use that power in service of the partnership, then everyone feels empowered. And that's a very different dynamic. And then children feel like they can relax into being led when it's appropriate. And they don't feel like they have to take over control in the relationship.
So do you think somebody who is practicing radical unschooling can also, be in alignment with the continuum concept as well? Or is there a fine line? Are there differences or similarities? Or what do you think?
Well, I think that for me, it was from other people that were practicing continuum style parenting that I learned about unschooling and made that choice for my kids before they were school age. And we didn't call it radical at the time, but then we didn't really have to, because basically what radical unschooling means is that you're not only allowing your children to self-direct their education, but you're also, let me say it this way, not only are you not imposing an education on them, but you're not imposing on them in the rest of life either. In other words, it's a partnership style. And our practice of continuum parenting was already that style. So it was, I guess, that made it radical. Yeah, to me, it's kind of funny how people can be unschoolers, where they say, oh, we don't want to impose education on our children. We want to let them choose their own educational path. But then to be very controlling in every other aspect of life seems a little bit bizarre to me and inconsistent. So, but I just think of it as a partnership style, that we're in this together. It's not about us controlling each other. It's about us empowering each other. And so when the kids are younger, I'm doing more of the empowering. But as they get older, it's like, it really is that we do empower each other. I remember the first day that I realized that my older child was old enough to do the taxi driving for the younger child, because as an unschooler, you're typically driving your kids all over the place for activities and classes and that sort of thing, the things that they want to do. And it makes you feel like as a parent, you're more of a taxi driver. But then as soon as my eldest daughter was old enough to drive and to drive her sister around, it's like, okay, hey, I'm busy. I've got a session going on. Can you go pick her up? And sure, I can do that. And it's this wonderful partnership. We really do empower each other.
I feel like there's one thing that I want to say that I've noticed, and it kind of speaks to the couple points that you've talked about recently, and Scott, and it's like a thing that I really see missing in, I mean, I work primarily with moms, so I use moms, and anyway, is like the piece that's missing for a lot of them is they forget to put themselves in a relationship. So their whole focus is on taking care of the child. But to me, in terms of being a leader, like a big piece of it is just being honest. Like, what do you need? How do you feel? And if it doesn't feel right to you, you need to interject that as well, and then talk with your child and come up with something that works for both of you. But it's such a missing piece. And I've seen that too in, you know, radical unschooling conversations where I feel like, you know, I just want to say, dude, like, you're a person too. You count too. Like, it's not just about the child having free reign in the house and impacting your experience negatively, but because you want to be a radical unschooler and not affect them, you're not setting any limits and you're not standing up for yourself. So I do find that that's a lot of the work that I do with the moms that I work with is, how does that feel to you? How do you feel? And even, again, since there didn't seem to be an issue with cussing, there was one mom who was really like having a rough time that I worked with in my last group. And at some point, and she was like, so what do I do? And I was like, just tell the fucking truth. Like, and I'm like, post it on your fridge, tattoo it on your forehead. And she's like, oh, like that, but that's, it's like, you have to put yourself in a relationship. I feel like I'm just saying the same thing in different ways, but that's really the piece that I feel that like parents are so afraid of being authoritarian that they're trying not to upset their child and to do different things. And then the problem is they can only hold that up for so long, and then they blow up. And then they do exactly what they promised that they would never do, which is what their parents did. And so to me, it is that leadership piece is what really bridges the gap of, don't be afraid to set limits. Like, you're the parent, you're the one who has the broader perspective of the family, of the whole life. And if you just let your child make all the decisions, your family's not going to run smoothly. Your life is not going to run smoothly. Like, they don't know that you have, well, I didn't really see doctors, but you know, they don't know that like you have appointments or that there are things that need to happen in the family. So you're responsible for doing that. And you don't have to be afraid of setting limits at times and having, you know, specific expectations when the vast majority of their life, they are being respected and honored. And that when you set limits, you do take their needs into account, and you don't schedule something when it's at their nap time, or if you know they're really crabby, or they're upset or they're getting sick, you will leave an event. So you're not doing it blindly ignoring them, but
Eliane, I think Lainie has a limit here she wants to set. No? You look like you're ready to go to, no? You're ready to cut to commercial or something? I'm trying to read your signal.
No. Please finish your thought. I was going to tell you this off camera, but my mute keeps unmuting itself accidentally, and that's what I'm reacting to what you're saying. I'm so sorry. We are going to take a break, but what I was reacting to, so the audience doesn't see this. They see just the person who's speaking, but we're looking at one another and we're having, you know, visual interactions and so forth. So that's what we're reacting to, but you don't see the whole thing. So, but what I'm thinking about here is the idea of, you know, I'm not coming from a background of continuum concept. I'm coming from a background of unschooling. And I've had to explain to people over and over what it means to be in partnership with your child. And the questions that I get all the time is, well, you know, you're older than your child. You're the authority. You're the adult. How could you be a partner? And I always answer that with, partnership doesn't mean you are two people that are exactly the same. You are yourself. The child is themselves, and they have their strengths and weaknesses, and you have your strengths and weaknesses. And perhaps you play different roles with one another, but you're not two exact same people. You are people that are coming to it very differently, and it resonates with what you're saying about, well, as a parent, you take the role of the leadership role, and that would be very equal to what I'm talking about from an unschooling vernacular, and that means partnership. So, I mean, it's, even though they're different modalities, or I'm coming at it and I'm understanding it from a different place, it's the same stuff. Yeah, I get it.
Yeah.
Anyway, we are going to take a break. We will be back in about 15 minutes. This is a longer break than normal, but it's really important that you hear from the author's words herself. So she's going to talk about the book, and we'll go ahead and play this clip, and we'll come back and talk about it in about 15 minutes.
On my first trip abroad, and as a good American girl from New York, where I went first was to Paris. Somebody drove me to Florence and introduced me to some of the young people there. And among them was this blonde, blue-eyed count who was extremely arrogant. He was very popular with women, so he was very arrogant, so I didn't really like him very much. But he was about to leave for excuse me, a diamond hunting expedition in the South American jungle. The thing that attracted me was certainly not diamonds. It was jungle. And in fact, as a child, I was always attracted to Tarzan and everything that had to do with jungles, because it seemed to me, and this is in retrospect, because I didn't have the words then, but I'm sure this was it, because it just feels right, that there was something original about it. There was something right about it. If you're in a jungle and you're a person animal, then you've got to be in the right place. It felt as though whatever went wrong, it hadn't gone wrong yet while you were still in the jungle, something like that. And Tarzan even was represented as pure. So that view of man in the jungle was that he's pure when he's in the jungle. I think that was the whole idea, that it was somehow before the fall. So that was very exciting. I mean, to go and live in the Stone Age, it's like going to the moon or something, just go and live in the Stone Age from Manhattan. It's pretty amazing and rich experience for a person. And I mean, bit by bit, if I looked at my notes, because I always kept journals, which are lost now, unfortunately, but the journals that I kept, it looked as though I were making notes for the continuum concept. But in fact, what I was doing was questioning things all the time. And so I suppose I was looking for what I found. I then realized that I had not just unlearned, as I thought of it, a lot of presumptions that we have about human nature. Our civilization has about human nature, such as, for example, boys will be boys, bad, oh, well, it's only human nature, bad. Well, you have to socialize children because otherwise they will be antisocial or at least asocial or something. And when you say children, you're talking about human nature. You're talking about the material of human nature, which we then live with, and we mold it into what becomes adults. Once I realized something, I had one or two insights, and then other insights began to go off like popcorn from there. Well, if this is true, well, then this must be true. Gosh, wow, I was quite excited about it. And then I began to realize that we made a terrible mistake about what human nature is. We just got it wrong. And, amazingly enough, the blindness that I had, I mean, despite the fact that I hadn't finished college and I never read a book, so I was, reasonably illiterate, reasonably unschooled in the culture, at least not academically. So I had, I mean, from my point of view, an advantage in not having rigidified my intellectual or my views, let's say. But even so, I was living for literally years. It was over, it was about 3 years or thereabouts, that I was looking straight at these Indians, living with them, and not seeing what I was looking at, because I just was so blinded by our view that I didn't even notice, amazingly enough, that the children never argued. Unsupervised. They'd play together all day, unsupervised. Tiny children from, you know, whatever, crawling, walking age, 1 year, whatever, up until, you know, the age they could still be called children, 10, 12, and 14 or whatever. They never, not only didn't fight, but they never even argued. And, I mean, this is not what we have been taught is human nature, or boys will be boysing, you know, at all. So I thought, well, boys won't be boys? There's something wrong here. Somebody's got something wrong here. But it was such a long time before I noticed. One just thinks, oh, well, these are little savages. They're, you know, they've got red paint on and they've little loincloths and feathers in their ears, so they're not people. Well, of course they are people. They're exactly the same species as we, except that they are behaving the way we have all evolved to behave. And we are completely crazed with being mistreated as infants and children, treated inappropriately for our species. And as a result, what we have done, and I'm putting it strongly on purpose because it is this bad, we have actually created an antisocial population by this very means. It's not an accident. Nobody's born rotten. You don't have just bad kids. It's not true. There is no such thing, but you can make them. And ironically, the reason that you make children be bad or antisocial is the way it's possible to do this with this profoundly social animal that we in fact are, is by the fact that we are so social, the fact that our parents, our tribesmen, our authority figures, whatever you want to call them, are so clearly expect us to be bad or antisocial or greedy or selfish or dirty or destructive or self-destructive or whatever. We so clearly are expected to do this that because we are so social, ironically, we meet those expectations because our sociality actually develops in human beings that way. The way it is meant to develop, that we meet the expectations of our elders. And now this is, whenever historically this reversal took place, when our elders stopped expecting us to be social and expected us to be antisocial, just to put it in gross terms, that's when the real fall took place. And we are paying for it so dearly. I mean, just imagine the alienated people that we have around us. Why do we have to lock our doors? Why do we have all these police forces? Why do we have armies against each other? I mean, it's not just Americans, it's the whole of Western civilization, so-called, whatever, you know, I mean, loosely called Western civilization, laboring under a misapprehension about what human nature in fact is. What I think I can contribute is to say and to draw attention to what is in fact our evolved nature, what is our innate, what are our innate tendencies and expectations. Now, when I spoke to the people, some of the people at the Center for Cognitive Studies when I was up there some years ago, they said that they didn't accept that there were such things as expectations, innate expectations, as I was postulating. But they did say, well, if you say so, then it's up to you to prove it, to demonstrate it, which I think I've done quite clearly, not just attempted, but I think, you know, these are things that have stood up now over the passage of time, because my book, when I finally did write it, the Continuum concept came out first in England in 1975 and then in America in 77 and other countries later. This happens even when babies are drinking their mother's milk. They're still throwing up. They're still violently ill. There's a lot of, you know, contractions and pain and so forth. Now, why is this? Why on earth, how on earth could we conceivably believe that we are evolved after hundreds of thousands, nay, millions of years into what we have now become, which is Homo sapiens, without somehow solving the problem of digesting our own mother's milk? I mean, no other animal has this. And it stands to reason that our mother's milk is digestible to us just as it is to every other animal. So why do we have indigestion? Well, I think it's quite clear that the reason that we have indigestion so uniformly, mind you, the people that I saw in the jungle never had indigestion unless they were violently ill with some fever or something. The babies, they never threw up. They didn't certainly routinely throw up. And they were also not wriggling and struggling and arching and flexing and squeaking and so forth like ours do normally. We keep saying normal because we've never seen a comfortable baby is the truth of it. Well, what it is stress. I mean, the babies are so stressed that they can't keep their food down. One of the great things is that the first minute that a baby is born, it's opposed by being taken out of the womb, and immediately, well, first things are stuck up its nose and things are stuck down its throat for reasons. They're always technical reasons. I mean, to take out mucus or to do this or to that, whatever it is, okay. And then weigh it and measure it, which isn't doing anybody any good to weigh and measure a baby at that incredibly sensitive time in its life. I mean, it's, you know, for what, the Bureau of Statistics or something, no one ever sees it again. Or maybe because they want to know what its astrological sign is or something, but it's not going to do the baby any good to be weighed and measured whatsoever. What it needs is to be in its mother's arms, and the mother even more so needs to have the baby in her arms so as to have this beautiful moment of falling in love, which is all choreographed by these exquisitely evolved hormones, which make it happen right away. Because if you weren't interested in this total stranger who isn't too cute at that stage anyways, probably all bright red and gooey and everything else, but you're all programmed to fall madly in love with it and to put its life even, you know, above your own in your caring for it. Because if you didn't, I mean, we wouldn't survive. I mean, if you were exhausted after giving birth, you'd say, oh, well, forget it, you know, just drop that little thing in the river and don't worry about it. Or just you leave it there for a minute, leave it, you know, I'll be back later. Well, you know, the wolves would have gobbled them up by that time. So obviously it's very important that we have this great falling in love, otherwise known as bonding, otherwise known as imprinting, kind of ceremony, which is built into us. It's built in because it has to be. It has to be for our survival. It has to have been there for us to have been the successful species that we are. Successful meaning that we survived, right? Over hundreds of times. Without Dr. Spock, amazingly enough, we managed to survive without any experts at all. So, I mean, what normal is adversarial. So that the baby arrives, and I insist that it has an innate expectation that it will be among trustworthy allies, and that whoever holds it and whoever is in charge of it has it in her or his care will be someone who is friendly, if you like, who is on. If I'm the baby, is on my side. Well, that's not what happens. They're not on my side. Whatever I want, they say no. I want to be with my mommy. I want to sleep with her. I want to be close. I want to be safe. I want to be with someone alive who's breathing and who's warm and who smells right and who feels right and who touches me and makes me feel my own flesh appropriately. Not a lifeless box, a lifeless cloth. And hear myself screaming in my own ears and hear other people screaming around me and get no response. Because I feel when I scream, when I'm a newborn baby, I feel when I scream that something's supposed to happen because I scream. That's why I'm screaming, not just to scream, but because I'm waiting, I'm expecting something. And it doesn't come, and I just scream more until I'm exhausted. So what normal is adversarial. I hope it shocks people a little bit when they realize that what they're doing with all the love that they have in their hearts, and I have no doubt of that, is adversarial. When you're following the doctors or the experts or your mother-in-law or your mother or your sister or whatever it is, and you are feeding the baby on a schedule, or you are denying it sleeping with you and being with you 24 hours a day, not less, you're being adversarial, because it's perfectly clear that unanimously all the millions, billions of babies who are crying at this very moment because they want to be next to a live body Can they really, do you really think they're all wrong? Couldn't possibly all be wrong. This is the voice of nature. This is the voice of not intellectually interfered with or interfered with in any way. This is the straight, clear, pure voice of nature. The baby knows what it's supposed to have, and the minute you put it down, it cries because it knows, and it's letting you know, it's signaling you perfectly clearly, don't put me down, don't put me down. And we have built into us equally, without a dictionary, the knowledge of what that means. When the baby goes, wah, 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 we know it means pick me up, don't put me down, don't leave me, don't leave me.
So we really hope that you've enjoyed that segment. And for me, the most powerful part of watching that segment was actually being able to feel the experience from the author herself, to be able to really kind of get a sense of where she was coming from. So behind the scenes, we're having these conversations and talking about where we should go for the rest of the show. And the question that really comes to mind is, how do we apply the continuum concept, something that is derived from ancient knowledge from the indigenous cultures that are not touched by quote unquote modern day living? How do we apply this kind of knowledge into a modern life where perhaps the cultural belief is the most progressive way to be is to be modern, and that may take different forms in different people's lives. So how do you apply this, and how do you even address that perhaps this is going back versus evolving? And the floor is yours.
I'll start. So I just want to say that for me, it's what I discovered was that a lot of people, when they're first beginning to try to apply these ideas, is that they take it kind of literally. And so they'll say, I'm trying to do everything exactly the way the Yaquana people in the book did. And they'll bring questions like, what would the Yaquana do about this? Or what would they do about that? And it's like, well, I don't know, because, we don't hunt our own food, and we don't, and they didn't have cars and telephones and stuff, so you can't apply things directly. And so for me, what made sense was to try to dig down below the surface and try to extract a kind of a philosophical or a paradigm, so that you try to think the way they think about life and about each other and about how they relate to children, and what their beliefs are that are more general, not about what we do or what kind of paint we put on our face, but like how we relate, how we perceive children. So one of the major themes that I've come to is that these indigenous people have a worldview of partnership. And to me, that doesn't just mean they're all they like each other. Partnership means that they see themselves as a part of a larger whole, that they're all connected. So it's this ethos of connectedness, and they see themselves as connected to each other. They see themselves connected to nature. They see themselves connected to their ancestors, and they see themselves connected to the younger generation in this similar way. So this connectedness is the essence of partnership, that we're all in this together. And when you start to take that attitude out of the jungle and apply it in a modern context, then you don't have to necessarily know exactly what they would do, but you can sense the spirit of how they would do things, and then apply that same spirit to the modern situations.
Yeah, so I was asked to write an article on this at some point, and which was really exciting. And what got me to wanting to write a book about, about how to apply the continuum concept in modern day life, because I feel like that's what I somehow managed to do, when my girls were little. And I think you've provided the link to that article that I wrote, that to me, there were, when I started thinking about, and also because I teach it to people, I've ended up creating programs based on that. I've figured out that there were 6, I call them principles, whatever, that to me are that attitude to be coming from, that to me is applying the essence of how the iguanas lived. And so to me, it is by, consistently striving to look at your children through those eyes and interact from that perspective of them being innately good and cooperative. So if you're really grounded in that, if they, misbehave, if they do something that you don't like, how do you react if you think that they're innately good? Well, then you understand there's a reason why they're behaving this way. And then you go address the cause of the behavior. So you're not trying to manipulate the behavior or trying to give an incentive or a punishment for them to not do it, but you address the root cause of it. And being on the same team, I mean, it's kind of the same thing as partnership, but when somebody says, oh, I did this in this situation, was it right? And I say, okay, so put yourself back there. Did it feel like you were on the same team when you reacted this way? No, it didn't. So if you came from that place of we're on the same team, how would you react? How would you handle that situation? So it is a retraining, that I find. And yeah, so that's one of the key things that I find in the people that I work with, is getting them to that place of really like knowing in their bones, oh, my children are innately good. And then you just, once you're deeply rooted in that, you behave differently. And even less than just the behaviors is just your attitude. Your children pick up on your attitude. It's not even the words that you use or the action that you take, but they respond to how you're feeling about them, which I guess that's one of the other pieces to me that I really got out of the continuum concept was Jean talks about how children do what you expect them to do. And to me, that was years before I did any personal growth or spiritual work. So I didn't know what the heck she was talking about. So it was a very foreign concept to me. But I've really come to realize that it is whatever you're really believing, your children will respond to that and they will do. So if you're like, be careful, you're going to fall. See, I told you were going to fall. Like, I was right. It's like, no, you have been, projecting this onto your child and interacting with them with a lack of trust. And from that place, they end up doing what you fear they're going to do. And I actually had an experience of that where the only time one of my children cut themselves with a knife, and they use sharp knives, really early on, like 2 or 3, I mean, really young on. And the only time that one of them cut themselves was I was at my father's and there was a cheese platter and Cassandra grabbed the knife and my dad went, be careful. And then she just turned around and it was just a tiny little nick, but it very much illustrated that's the only time that that one of my children hurt themselves with a knife. So that's another thing, is if you can really just know that your children, they so respond to how you are and what you're feeling and what you're thinking and what you're believing, so that if there's a situation that you struggle with regularly, I have the moms, I ask so how is it that you feel this way? Or what's going on inside of you? Or what is it that you're believing about this? Because oftentimes the children act out what's inside of us.
That's so true, Eliane. And I think what you're pointing to is that the real work of this parenting approach is to stop focusing on your child and bring it back to yourself. That's so much of what you see in the children, like you said, it's a reflection of something going on in you. They tend to amplify it and exaggerate it, and it's really good information when they behave in strange ways. And you think, am I somehow projecting that kind of energy toward them? And often you find that you are, or you find that there's some other kind of thing, like you're sort of projecting fear, projecting anxiety, control, all of those things that you do that sort of undermine this natural pattern of trust. And so just if there were ever like a maxim that you could say is just like, bring it back to me. Right? There's something going on with me, and obviously sometimes it's just something going on with the child, but why didn't you notice it? Because I wasn't fully present. And so there's really, I love what you said earlier about it just being about presence. It's such a powerful concept to just be present to what's true in yourself, be present to what's true about your children, be present to what's happening in the relationship, be present to the process, because it can be messy, and it doesn't have to just always be, perfectly clean interactions. So what feels uncomfortable now, if you just can stay present, the discomfort will pass. And so being present and paying attention to what's happening in your own self is so powerful.
Yeah, it's so funny because, like I said, I have a couple parenting programs, and at some point in the more intensive one where I work closely with people, at some point they all say, I thought I was going to work on my parenting, but it's all about working on myself. Like, so little has to do with my children. And it's absolutely true. It's like, once you clean up, that's why I've ended up calling what I do clean parenting, because I feel like so much of it is just about cleaning up like all the extras, so that all that's left is just like the essence of being present and just being really connected.
So can I ask you a question about being a present and trusting parent? How do you continue to do that if or when a child makes bad choices for themselves, perhaps maybe around, I don't know, abusive behavior to themselves, either with drugs or with food that's not healthy for them, or other things, that are harmful to the child themselves? How do you stay present and stay in a place of trust if that's the behavior that's happening?
Well, I didn't really experience that.
Most of our stories are going to come from what we've talked with other people. But would you agree, Eliane, that so often it comes back to like revealing something that's going on beyond what's in the child's behavior?
Yeah. To me, there's a cause, like I said, I did all of those things, and I did all of those things and I survived. So I think that's one thing for me that brought me some peace is, I've done 99 of those things. So if they do 2 or 3, I'm sure they're going to be fine. So maybe it's a natural trust for me that I had. But really my experience is that like I so knew for me where it came from. I remember the first time I drank when I was 14, and I remember feeling good inside for possibly the first time in my life. Like something about the alcohol soothed all that anxiety and stuff. So of course, and I didn't feel loved. So of course I reached out, I was addicted to relationships and all of that. Well, my daughters didn't have that emptiness, and they didn't have all that ickiness to cover up. So I think I just had a lot of trust that I had so attended to making sure that they remained feeling good in themselves, that didn't happen. And to me, that's where I always go. Like, whatever the behavior is, go look at what's happening inside of you and helping them process whatever they're feeling, whatever they're experiencing.
Yeah, and I find that more often than not, there is something going on in the relationship that you can address. And this sort of acting out behavior often is just acting out something that's going on inside that can be healed in the relationship if you pay attention to the relationship and heal And so often it may be something, some disconnect that has happened. Sometimes they happen gradually. It's not always like a major rift in the relationship, but there can be a disconnect that happens over time, and no one is necessarily at fault. It could just be there was a change in something. Maybe you moved to another house and your relationship constellation with friends changed, or your neighbors changed, or it could be the parent got a new job and something about that changed the timing, or the way, you gave up a certain ritual of connection that you didn't even realize was a ritual to the child. And like, there can be these all sorts of things. You have to do detective work to figure out what is it that has shifted in our relationship, that it no longer is a safe place for my child to work through these kinds of intense emotional processes, such that they're trying to work them out in other more destructive ways.
Yeah.
So in essence, you're saying that the child's behavior is a reflection of the relationship of the parenting. Can a parent come into this philosophy of living their lives through partnership and through presence after not having it? Can a parent repair their relationship with their child, their relationship with their parents, their relationship with themselves? Can they do that? Is that possible?
It's certainly my experience that you can. I've had some repair work with my own parents, and I've certainly, things have gone pretty well thanks to Jean Lee Love. Things have gone pretty well in my own family, but that doesn't mean we haven't had our bad days or bad weeks where some repair work had to be done. And it's actually not complicated. It's just like repair is what happens naturally. Life is self-repairing if you allow it. If you stop doing the things that cause it to go into disrepair, it just naturally comes back into alignment. And it can be as simple as just letting go of resentment, or humbling yourself to admit that you made a mistake, and opening your heart to allow some healing to occur in relationship with your child or your partner or whomever.
Yeah, I was going to say, it's been, and I'm not sure if you were asking for more for us as adults or for children, or, but like, I've worked with people who had, like, I think the oldest child that the person who I worked with had was 13, and she hadn't even heard about attachment parenting. And it really didn't take that long to really completely shift the relationship with her son. So it's really, yeah, I don't know that you can ever completely, undo you can't redo the in arms phase, or I don't know, I don't know about that. And I'm still working on repairing myself, definitely. But I've been really amazed to see how quickly shifts can happen. And it does seem that oftentimes, with the children, and interestingly, most people that I work with, it's always with their oldest child that they have the challenges. And that was the case for me too when my girls were younger. But it's like, I always find that at some point in the program, like, the mom will really get like, okay, now I'm really seeing her as being innately good. And that completely changes the attitude. And the children change so quickly when that shift happens. It's almost instantaneous. And behaviors change, like, like a child who was previously always hitting his brother suddenly stops. Or like, it just happened this week that somebody shared that, where that was a continuous, that the child was always hitting his younger sibling. And once the mom made that shift, she saw him about to go hit, and then he stopped himself and he didn't do it and interacted positively. So it's such a, like, when you feel really loved and welcome, it's like you feel good inside. And when you feel good inside, you act nicely. It's just like you get in harmony with yourself, with life, with others.
By the way, Jean did I think she played around with the idea of different ways for people to heal their unmet needs. You know, as adults, people whose needs as infants weren't met. I know my own partner has gone through various kinds of healing where she actually re-experienced her birth. She re-experienced being left alone in a crib and sort of was able to process that with her adult awareness. And so there are a lot of different ways that you can process the sort of the broken continuum effects, and or even co-sleeping, you know, if you were left to sleep alone and just being able to cuddle, or, you know, I don't know. People should cuddle more is what I'm saying. I wonder if we could talk. I think we're running out of time, but I thought it would be good also to talk more about the connection between the continuum concept and self-directed education, because this is sort of that's the main theme of this show. And I think we've already touched on it a little bit, but I think it would be interesting do you have any questions along those lines, or do you have any comments, Eliane?
Well, one comment that I can have, I mean, in a way, it goes back to trust. You know, that like such a core concept of the continuum concept is this idea of trusting our children. And I mean, it was amazing to me. Like, I unschooled too for a number of years, and like no curriculum, no formal teaching of anything. And all of my girls ended up going to public school, all in 5th, 4th, and 5th grade, with like zero prior preparation, or maybe like very minor. And they all did really well in school. And in fact, my middle daughter graduated valedictorian and got into NYU. The topic of her essay was how her unschooling experience was going to make her a good candidate for like higher education. So anyway, I told Audrey, like, thank you. You've just did such a wonderful, you're such a wonderful proof that you don't need to like start teaching children, or like she didn't learn to read till she was 8, and just decided to go to school when she decided to go because she wanted to. And I never had them do homework. I never made them go to school. They were completely in charge of their own education. And they all did, yeah, really well in school and adapted easily because they wanted to go. And
that was going to be my next question. Thank you, Scott, so much for
I'm the Time Lord.
So, but what I was going to ask in relationship to learning is, can you be a practitioner of the continuum concept and have your kids go to a formalized school? And so you did answer that, Eliane, and I'm wondering, did your children go to school by choice? So it wasn't a compulsory decision. It wasn't your decision.
No, it was by choice. And it was so hard for me to let my first daughter go. Oh my God. It was like, I remember what my home birth doctor had said. He said, the hardest job for a home birth doctor is learning to sit on our hands and do nothing. And I was like, okay, you say that you trust, you say that you want them to be strong enough to know what they want to do and support them in their decision. And if her decision is public school, you have to stay in integrity with what you believe. And it was so hard to do. Yeah, it was her own choice. And all 3 of them ended up going. And yeah, they did well. And I think it's because they were older when they went, because my youngest went 2 days when she was 7. And she was a wreck for months after. It took her months to recover from those 2 days in school. Like, it's so impacted. She's also highly sensitive. So it really, really affected her. But as they were older, I mean, it was just amazing to watch them stand up to adult. Like, they have it's like they just knew how to conduct themselves, but without taking on. Like, they'd say, oh, this teacher said that, but I told her, oh, it's your opinion. Like in 5th grade, you know, they would say that of the teacher and not be intimidated by them at all, or stand up to administrators when they would give bogus reasons for why they had to do what they were doing, and just argue their case. And yeah, it was just beautiful. I loved it. Even though I would have preferred for them to stay.
So, and this is one of there are a couple of paradoxes in trying to be a continuum in the modern context, because on the one hand, the things that we do, the things that we call society or social, the things that society does are the things that are, quote, social. But in many cases, those things run counter to human nature. So they're social, but they're not exactly humane. And I think compulsory schooling and forcing children to focus on things that they're not interested in is an example of that sort of inhumane education. And yet it's what society does, and we are a social species. So it is kind of the social thing. As a social, innately social people, it is normal for us to want to do what our people do. That's part of our continuum. Part of our evolved expectation is to do what people do. And so we have this sort of odd conundrum where, on the one hand, we need to not do what society tells us we should do in order to do what our evolved expectations tell us to do as far as how we educate ourselves. And so I guess the point being, it can work either way and it cannot work either way. So if you choose unschooling, a lot of the biggest problems with unschooling is that the kids don't have the kind of social support that they need because of the isolation that it creates. And that's why it's so important for unschoolers to form communities and learning partnerships and that sort of thing. And then the same thing for kids in school. Obviously, we know a lot of kids in conventional schools are suffering and are being having a lot of their gifts sort of undermined. But then you have kids like Eliane's who are parented with this empowering partnership, and they're able to make the best of that situation so that they don't experience it as disempowering, and they do get to the benefit of being of meeting that innate expectation of being part of or following the patterns of society. So it's tricky. There's not a right or a wrong way. I always think it's better if kids can avoid conventional schooling, because it does undermine a lot of their creativity and that sort of thing. But there are places like Germany where it's not legal to unschool or even to homeschool, and then the best you can do is help create a strong partnership at home and a strong partnership between the parent and the child, so that you're always on the child's side and you're not just sort of this extension of the school authority that undermines that makes the children feel disempowered.
I think another important piece too is, and that's something I got from Marshall Rosenberg, who wrote Nonviolent Communication, which to me I feel is it's the needed complement to applying continuum concept in our society, is like the empathy piece, and reading Nonviolent Communication to get some of those skills to help process some of that baggage that our children can't help but pick up in our society because of the baggage that we carry and what's in society. And yeah, Marshall talks about I forget the term that he uses now, but it has to do with force, that there's a cost anytime that you use force with people, but that if at least you name it and you own it. So to me, that's an important thing. Even if children are forced to go to school, that I would make sure that I would acknowledge that, yeah, it's really hard for you to be in school. Like it's not something that feels good to you to be sitting in. So then you have a way of at least helping them process the piece of being in school that is challenging, so that they don't carry that in and are not told, no, there's nothing wrong with school and you should be fine. And then they think there's something wrong with them, that they're not feeling good, and they don't have a way of processing the trauma. I mean, it might sound like a big word, but to me, it does feel like trauma to be a 5 or 6 year old and to be in school all day. I think part of the reason why I work for my girls is they were 10 when they went in, and that made a huge difference to being really young.
So before we run out of time, there's another question from one of our viewers, and I want to make sure that we get to this. Kava Williams asks for either panelists or both. Having kids close in age, there can be fear of abandonment or attention issues coming from the elder ones, or even sibling rivalry. How would the continuum concept apply to a situation like that?
I'll take this one because it's a pet issue of mine. So part of the problem is that people don't recognize that that there's a problem. There's a structural problem in the way we do family in our society. It's called the nuclear family, and the people that that Jean lived with didn't live in nuclear family units. They lived as a band of tribe mates who essentially, even though they're not all blood relatives, they're like family to each other. So it's this huge extended family, almost like a group marriage, where everyone has everyone else's back, and the entire range of, from babies to middle children to adolescents to adults to elders, everyone is always connected. And you don't have this strange, isolated living format where there's just two adults and a couple of little kids who don't have the diversity of people and personalities and needs and gifts in order to generate sort of natural, organically grown solutions for people to be able to solve these problems in an almost effortless way. So if you, for example, are if you are in a nuclear family home and you have a sibling and you're trying to play, and then you get tired of playing with that sibling, or you're suddenly just the harmony's not happening anymore, then too bad, you're stuck with that person, right? Too bad. Or maybe part of you doesn't want to play with them anymore, but another part of you is like, oh, there's no one else to play with because there's these four walls, that, and we don't really know the neighbors that well, and they all go to school, and so they've been trained to only relate with people the same age. And that's kind of a crazy making situation. So that if you compare that to the tribal situation, first of all, they don't live in dwellings. At least the Yaquana people, they had these collective dwellings, like a big old roundhouse that everyone slept in, but they didn't hang out there very much of the day. Mostly they had this huge jungle, all this expansive place where they could explore, and people that, if tensions built up, there was plenty of space for people to diffuse the tensions, literally, by just creating distance. And there's always someone else that they could connect with. If the energy between two particular people wasn't gelling, then they could just sort of drift apart, and there would be someone else they would gel with. And so that sort of more tribal kind of environment lends itself to a more adaptive, ongoing harmony that is very, very difficult to maintain in the nuclear family. It's just, so I guess that's not solving the problem, but that's sort of explaining why it is a problem, and why Jean Liedloff in The Jungle never saw anything like sibling rivalry.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there's probably 1,000 more questions we could ask and address and answer in regards to this. And I really think we should schedule another show and actually do that. We've run almost to the end of 2 hours, which is crazy. I just looked at the time and I am shocked.
I'm not. I knew it was going to happen.
Crazy. Well, then let's just make a commitment, and we'll come together and address this topic again, because there's a lot more places to explore. I really want to get into what community looks and feels like, and how we can adapt that in our lives as unschoolers or those that are following the Continuum concept. And there's something else that I realized that we didn't address, and we're going to have to wrap it up. But we're living in a modern culture that tends to label everything. And I think the tension comes from when labels are so identified with themselves, and there's almost an ego surrounding that label, that when another concept or another way of being presents itself and it's not exactly the same, there tends to be tension. And I notice that there is tension in those, some of those that follow the Continuum concept and unschoolers. But there's a lot of similarities, and those that are attachment parents, and the labels are where the problem is. It's really just getting down to the root of it, which we're all talking about the same thing too. Anyway, have you quickly noticed any of those sorts of tensions from different groups? And then if you answer that, go ahead and give me your closing thoughts. And then share with us your projects and websites as well. But answer that question first, and closing thoughts afterwards.
Wow, it feels like a final exam.
Which I don't have the answer to. Yeah, I can't say that I've noticed. I can't say that I've noticed it that much per se, and maybe it's because with my girls being grown, I'm more focused on the working with people part versus being involved in groups. So I don't feel like I'm really connected to that, and even some things are being talked about and they're like, oh, my baby needs to get tummy time. And I'm like, what the hell is tummy time? Like, I've not heard of those new modern concepts. But anyway, yeah, so sorry, I can't really address that. But in terms of closing thoughts, one thing that I would say is, to me, it is like the secret of life is in there, in the book, The Continuum Concept, or at least to really, it's amazing. I say parenting can be easy. Like, that's one of my, taglines or something. And it really can be. It's work when you have multiple children when they're young, but it really can be easy, the parenting piece, when you really click with it, when it really clicks inside of you, the Continuum concept approach to it. And like, I so wish I could just inject everybody with the commitment to do the work that it takes to get there. Because that's the piece that's hard, is getting to the place of embodying it. But once it is, it's just amazing. And then the rest of your years with your children are so easy. And then your children are thriving and you don't worry about them. And so, yeah, I wish that everybody who resonates with it, because not everybody resonates with it, but everybody who resonates with it, that they would do whatever it's like, find a way to integrate. And if you can't do it on your own, there are, Scott and I, and there are other people out there who teach it too, and who can help you implement it, because it's amazing. In terms of my projects, well, I have a book that will be out within a couple months, hopefully, called Clean Parenting, the Peaceful Parent's Essential Handbook. And that's really mostly a compilation of articles, but of the work that I've done in working with people, and what I've found helps them, or are the missing pieces to get them to really apply it in their families. And I've created a program called the Clean Parenting Program, which I'm just amazed. It feels like it's my fourth baby. Like, I don't know how this thing came out of me, because it's amazing how much it transforms people's lives, and how by the end of the program, or at some point toward the end, people are like, I know what you're talking about. I know what you mean when you say parenting can be easy. Okay, now I'm connected to myself. I don't need to read books anymore. So it's really, the work is really clearing up and aligning yourself with being on the same team and looking for win-wins and coming with your children from a place of being innately good and integrating that into your day-to-day actions. And you can find me, my website is coachingforwholeness.com. I know it's on the show page. And my Facebook page is Parenting for Wholeness. And I suggest you follow it if you resonate with this, because I'm really picky about what I post on there. And people seem to get a lot out of what I post on there. So I suggest you follow it.
My turn. Thank you, Eliane. It's going back to the question about labels and factions and that sort of thing. I have experienced plenty of that. Really, from almost the very beginning, there was sometimes unschoolers and fighting with radical unschoolers and attachment parenting and the old Continuum list discussion group. There's I don't know how many different discussions that kept coming back up and up again over the years. Is it Continuum concept or is it attachment parenting? And people kind of obsessing about the labels and I don't actually think that's very important. In fact, I think it's an indicator that you might be barking up the wrong tree if you're worried about the labels, because when you're talking about the labels, you're usually sort of identifying with, is this the true way or is this not the true way? There's this sort of almost, it leads you down a path that at the extreme becomes fundamentalism. It's like, this is the one right way to do things. And then you start to create an us, them, and you can't possibly get along with your neighbors who are too mainstream or their kids go to school or they had a C-section or whatever, blah, blah, blah. These things that we use as excuses to judge people, and it creates less connection, not more, but more connection is what we need. So I encourage people one of the biggest messages in my writing is to try to transcend that sort of dualistic right-wrong thinking and think in terms of not who's right and who's wrong, but what works. And so if you're doing more of a mainstream parenting thing right now, or if you like to call it attachment parenting instead of Continuum concept, and that works for you, that's great. It's like, as long as it doesn't infringe on anyone else. And that same attitude is what allows you to create working partnerships in your own family and in your own community. So you're focused not on who did the right thing and who did the wrong thing, but what works for everyone. And to me, that's the essence of partnership, is that you're really focused on workability and mutual empowerment, and not so focused on who fits what label or whether they qualify as a pure this or a pure that. Or who's right or who's wrong. It's just, we're all in this together. So my ongoing project is called The Daily Groove. It's sort of like a blog, but most people who read it get it through the email. And that's how it started, as a mailing list. And it actually grew out of my realization that if people took their entire childhood to learn a culture of control and all of these things that get in the way of a naturally unfolding continuum, then they can't just read a book and have it suddenly disappear. They have to have a daily practice of shedding it, letting it go, and replacing it with what would have been in place if they had grown up in a partnership culture. So that really is the theme of my work, is creating a partnership culture through partnership style parenting. And the way you do that is the same way you got the domination culture, one day at a time. So if you subscribe to the Daily Groove, you get a short daily message. It takes about a minute to read, and it helps you question one particular thing that you can practice thinking differently that day and having a new perspective, or more of coming at it from a different angle, seeing it through the lens of partnership rather than the more conventional control orientation. So that's available at dailygroove.com. And that's where you'll find information on, my coaching and that sort of thing as well. So, did I mention that the Daily Groove is free? So, love for more and more people to subscribe to that and benefit from it. I hear from people every day who say that it sort of helps them stay on track. And I think that's the kind of thing we need to supplement books like a Continuum Concept, or to supplement courses like what Eliane is offering. We need to be reminded every day. So that's my piece in the puzzle. I'm also recently involved with the Alliance for Self-Directed Education, working with Peter Gray and Pat Ferenga and some other people that are known in homeschooling and unschooling and free schooling, democratic schooling, all of those different kinds of education where the focus is on allowing the children to be in charge of the educational process is what we're really trying to push the needle on and create a society where that becomes more normal and not such an extreme choice. So I'm bringing a lot of my experience as an unschooler to that project, and also excited about launching a new website that's coming within a couple of months. And you can go, I don't know if we have this, I think we have this in the show notes, but you can go to selfdirected.org, which is spelled self-directed.org. And that you will find sort of a preview there, a little video from Peter about this movement that we're trying to create to really get more people excited about liberating children to learn on their own terms. Yay!
Awesome. Thank you both for being a part of tonight's really, really amazing and inspirational conversation. Generally, you're right, Scott, we're focused more on the learning and the education and defining and exploring all of those things. I was enthralled. I was absolutely enthralled by going down these paths with both of you and learning so much. I was being educated, and so was everybody else who was watching this, about the Continuum concept. And it's a book that I haven't admittedly read, but I'm going to pick this up because everything that you've been talking about resonates so deeply for me. And I'm so glad, Scott, that you addressed the need or the experience of labels. I've seen that, by working on these shows and sort of floating around the alternative education communities, I've seen this all too often. And that was one thing I really wanted to ask you guys about, because somebody from the outside who sees it and, sees that kind of stuff going on, it's interesting to know two very different perspectives on how that has transformed or been a part of your experience. Anyway, it's not important. What's important is everything that we talked about tonight. Scott, you have something else you want to say? Go ahead.
I just realized I left out a big resource. That website I made for Gene Liedloff in 1998 is still there, and that's continuumconcept.org. So go check it out if you want to sort of read some articles that she wrote, and some of them summarize the concept pretty well. And then you can also get on that email-based support group. It's the same group that started back in 1998. So we'd love to have more people getting that information. Continuumconcept.org.
That's kind of huge. So thank you for sharing that.
There's also a really sweet Facebook group, the Continuum Concept Connection Group, it's really lovely Facebook group, growing very fast, but yeah, out of all the Facebook groups I've been in, I'm just in love with that one and how supportive people are. And so it's really another good resource. And I do have a Continuum concept page on my website as well, that where I list, different resources too.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much for sharing those. And I'm actually going to go check them all out too. So I just want to thank real fast Nina and Anne for your hard work producing these shows. And I'm so grateful for the work that you do and the panels that you put together and the topics that you introduce to the world. And we're creating this incredible directory of conversations, and everybody's invited to be a part of it. And this is a community. So thank you so much to our guests and to our producers and to Noelle and Biggie over at Conscious Consumer Network. So thank you from the bottom of my heart. Lastly, I just wanted to say, wherever you are and whatever you do, continue to always do it for the love of learning.
Conscious Consumer Network was designed to create a live broadcast TV network for free and independent media, and has been live on the air since the 1st of January 2015. CCN gets millions of minutes watched every month and is viewed in over 140 countries, having produced around 1,400 shows and counting.
And it's very hard to get on the mainstream media, of course, the corporate media that's getting tighter and more monopolized and more restrictive for any outside information.
The live broadcasts are free to view and all shows are archived in high definition on YouTube. CCN plays host to a stellar team of broadcasters and producers, all of whom rely on the network to get their message and information out to the world. CCN has continued to evolve, constantly seeking to create greater media usage and opportunities for both broadcasters and viewers, including supporting projects such as the newly launched consciouscommunities.org, a brand new social media platform that is free to use and has been created for those dedicated to the pursuit of freedom, justice, peace, and sustainability to come together and co-create the solutions to a better world. Due to the constant heavy usage, we are in need of replenishing and replacing of key hardware and infrastructural wear and tear. This includes the fixing and replacing of parts of the live broadcast equipment system, as well as increasing storage capacities for content and projects. Without this, CCN and its affiliate projects will simply not be able to continue. Conscious Consumer Network is a publicly funded project, and it is up to you all to keep CCN on the air. Support our funding drive with a donation or become a monthly pledger. We thank you all for supporting free and independent media.